Okay, this is the second half of the OSF files on, this is, I guess, January 16th, 2024. This will be the actual use of the OSF files in the charts.
All right. So what I have here right now, this is just a new workspace. And I've just put the chart tool on here. And this is all the default settings. So let's go in here and make some customizations and then go and create an OSF file. Now, for purposes here, I'm going to create a separate directory because I actually do have OSF files on this system that I do use. By default, the tool wants to put your OSF files on your C drive in the chart tools data directory. And this is something that you would normally create when you install the tools. Underneath that directory, you have a directory called My OSF Files, which is where your personal OSF files will be created and stored. And again, that's by default. If we go under here, you can see I've got some, got some other directories for various purposes here. Let's go and add a directory. And let's see what do we want to call this here. OSF lessons. Okay, let's copy that because we'll need that. Okay, so this directory is where we're going to be creating our OSF files for today's lesson. So I'm going to go into the tools here, to the chart tool. Go to edit studies, get into that customize indicator dialog. Here we have chart tool beta 2, customized. And I'm going to go almost to the bottom here. Here we go. And I'm going to change the path to the directory where we're going to keep our OSF files here. So I just created that directory. So I've just added it to the end of the default, because the default was to go to the drive C in the chart tools data directory, and underneath that to go to the My OSF Files subdirectory. And so I've added a backslash and the name of the new directory that we just created. So now the tool should go to that directory to look for personal OSF files and to create personal OSF files. Now, let's make some changes here. I'm going to go back up to the top. And let's see, I'm going to change the band creation method. I'm going to change that to 5 because that back tests better on the markets I happen to trade. And let's go change the bull and the bear boxes. We've got the green and red boxes on the chart right now, and those are representing segments. I'm going to change that to use segment lines. So I'm going to go down to the settings for segments. I'm just going to look here until I see settings names that start with segment. Oh, here we go. I'm going to go turn on the segment lines. So I'm going to set this to true. I'm going to change the color to gold because that shows up reasonably well over Zoom. Try a different line style. I think we used 3 the other day, so we'll try 4. I'm going to set the thickness here. We'll try 3. Now, these settings are all settings under OSF control. As we talked about in the presentation earlier, and as we've talked about in the prior lessons, you can tell these because the entire setting has to be in quotes, and they all have the word default in them. And we can also put comments. The pound sign, or the number sign, as it's also known, is the sign to start a comment. And so everything that appears after it will be ignored. So that allows us to take the prior setting and leave it there if we want. We can just put our new setting in, put a pound sign immediately after it, and then everything that's there or was there previously is now a comment and will be ignored. And this is useful if we want to preserve the prior setting. We're trying something new. If we don't like the results of the change we made, we still have the old setting right there. And it's easy enough to just go back and, backspace out the change we made. And we're back exactly to where we were. We can also put a comment in here to remind ourselves why we made a particular change. Okay, so moving right along here, I'm going to change the transparency level. I'm going to try 180. I think that'll show up okay over Zoom. We'll turn on the labels here. We'll let the tool tell us how long the segments are. I'll probably set the label color here to match our lines. So I'll set that to gold. We'll leave the font at the default. We'll make it bold just because we can. I'll put a comment here. So you can see we have a comment in the setting there. Make the font size a bit bigger so we can see it. I'll set the transparency to 180. I think that's what we used for the line. And we'll leave the offset at the default. We won't bother identifying odd length segments or anything like that. But we want to turn off the bull and the bear boxes. You can leave them both on if you want, but I'm going to turn these off. Gives us a cleaner screen today. And it's also a pretty blatant change. All right, so let's go see what this looks like. Okay, that's a pretty big change. That's a pretty noticeable change. So now let's say that I like this particular setup and I want to use this on all my charts from now on. Well, we can go and write this as an OSF file. And then when we create additional charts, additional chart windows, instead of entering all those changes, we can just go in and point the tool to the directory where we have our OSF files, and then just tell it to load it. And it should find that and automatically load it. And that'll save us from having to go through this whole setup process again on those other windows. So let's go in here to customize. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and then work back up, because that's easier. There we go, OSF creation settings. Now, if I'm going to go and create this right now, it's set to associate the OSF file with the market and interval that's currently in use on the chart. And if we lower this value here, for instance, if we go to 2 instead of 3, that's a lower priority value if you remember the slide. Going to 2 will associate the OSF file with just the symbol from the chart. This chart is on MNQH24. If we set it to 1, it'll go to just the interval. We happen to be on a 2584 tick chart, as it turns out. And if we set this to 0, then it won't be associated with any particular market or interval and can be applied to all markets or intervals. So let's start out with 3. And I'm going to tell him to create a rules OSF file. We did change some graphics elements, so we'll create a skins OSF file here as well. And we'll create a miscellaneous one just to complete the set. All right, let's go look at our directory to see what we got. So if we go into our OSF lessons directory, we have 3 OSF files. And you can see that they're personal OSF files because they all start with the word my, M-Y. And then you can also see what table they're for, because the table, the settings group is included in the name. So here the top one's the miscellaneous group. Here we have the rules group. The bottom one is the skins group. And since we have associated these with a symbol, the symbol also appears in the name. We also associated it with an interval. So the interval appears in the name as well. Now, this association is also stored inside the OSF file. So you can't just rename an OSF file to try to get it to work on another market or another interval. We'll show you a way to do that later. But just by looking at the files now, you know what they're intended to be used on. Let's take a quick look at what's in these files. Let's go look at the rules file. Now, you're not going to want to edit these files. The files do have checksums and other things. So if you change them, the changes will be detected and the system won't use the files anymore. It will assume that they have been corrupted. And the purpose behind that is that we don't want the tools using corrupted OSF files, because then that could cause them to display inappropriate things, which could potentially cause somebody to lose money. So, we have several mechanisms in the file to try to see if the file has been altered and potentially corrupted. So you don't want to edit them, but we can view them and we can see what's in there. You can see up here, here we have the market and the interval. And then we can see we have the whole rules table dumped here. And this here tells us there's 150 values in the rules table. And so we'll have 150 values put out here. You can see what they all are. Now, if you're really interested in the settings and what's being used, there is another way to look at your settings, and that is the dump capability. If you go into the customize indicator dialog again, we'll scroll all the way to the bottom. You can see show settings in use. And you can turn this on, tell them to dump the settings in use. You can send it to a file if you want. If you don't send it to a file, it will go to the Easy Language print log, which you can get to from the View menu up at the top of the screen here. Looks like it might be under the word recording. That figures. If you do send it to a file, you can change the directory and even the name or part of the name anyway that is used for the file to hold the settings. But this will dump all three tables, and instead of just giving you the codes for the settings, it actually gives you the full name of each setting as well as the setting. Okay, so here we created a level 3 OSF file. Let's go create a level 2 OSF file just so you can see the difference in the file name. So a level 2 OSF file is associated with a symbol, but not an interval. Okay, so we got another 3 files created. Let's do this by date modified here. All right, so we can see the top 3 files here are the new ones. And again, we created a complete set. We dumped the full table for each of the settings groups. But now you can see that they are only associated with a symbol because there's only a symbol in the name. The interval has been dropped from the name. And again, that lets you know what these OSF files are intended for. Now, if we were to go to a level 1 OSF file, which is associated with an interval only, we would get three more OSF files here. And instead of having the symbol in the name, it would have the interval. And if we went all the way down to a level 0 OSF file, which is not associated with any particular market or interval, then the name will be short, and you just see my_miscellaneous or miss my_rules and my_skin. And so you can tell immediately that those are not associated with anything and can be potentially applied to any chart. Now, you're going to want to make sure that you turn off the creation settings after you're through creating your files. Otherwise, every time the chart tool is restarted or run, it'll create a new OSF file. So you need to remember to go back in and turn off those creates. And it's the same thing if you're dumping the settings. You want to turn that off. If you forget that that's on, you're going to get a lot of those generated. So we'll go back down. All right, here we are. So I'm going to turn off these creates. Now let's go up here and let's load OSF files. So we've got some to play with. Let's go and load those guys. And I'm going to get rid of all those manual overrides now. Since we have some OSF files to do it, let's make use of those. And this will give us a chance to see what our OSF files are doing. In fact, it might be easier just to make a new chart window. Why don't we do that? So let's go make a new chart window. And we'll set that chart window to point to our directory where we have these OSF files. And then we can see what happens. Okay, that should have copied that. All right, let's shrink this window a bit here. Oops, that was all of TradeStation. I didn't want all of TradeStation. I just wanted this chart window. There we go. All right, so let's create a new chart analysis window here. Take this, we'll bring it up over here. Okay, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Let's make it look better, particularly over Zoom. Okay, so let's add the chart tool here. If I'm going too fast, please let me know. So I'll add chart tool beta 2. We'll just go with the defaults right now. Okay, so we can see here with the defaults running, we got the bull and the bear boxes. We don't have the segment lines. So let's go in and tell the chart tool in this window to use the OSF files we created. So we'll go into the customize indicator dialog. Here we go. There we are. Scroll down to the bottom and work up since that's faster in this case. All right. Now, my OSF directory, this is where we tell the tool where to look for OSF files to use. Let's see if I can cut and paste that. Did it work? I don't know if it worked or not. Okay, so I've got that cut paste now in there. So he's got the directory where we created our OSF files. And now I just need to tell him what to load. So I'm going to tell him to load personal rules, skins, and miscellaneous OSF files. And let's see what happens here. Okay, you can see he found the OSF files and he loaded them and he used the settings. And now our two charts look the same. This one still has all the manual overrides in place. This one here has only the changes to tell them to load the OSF files. Now, right now we have OSF files that are associated with MNQ on the 2584 tick interval. And we also have OSF files associated with just MNQ. So if I change this interval, we should still go to a 5-minute here. He should still find the OSF file, and he did. The default would give us the bull and bear boxes, and the segment lines would be turned off. So he found the OSF file that we associated with just the symbol. And so even though we are on a different interval than the one where the OSF file was created. He still found it and applied it because, again, the particular OSF file was associated with just the symbol. All right, now let's go to a different market. Let's go look at SPY. Oops, we got our default settings back because we don't have an OSF file there that applies to SPY. We just have the OSF file for the MNQ. But if we go back to the MNQ, he finds the OSF file and updates the settings accordingly. Any questions about that so far?
We're good.
All right. So let's go look at some more advanced uses. Well, let's actually work towards being able to modify our OSF files. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up our window on the left to act as a sender. And we're going to use our window on the right as a receiver. So in our window on the left, we're going to go into our settings here. Scroll all the way down to the bottom because the settings for this are near the bottom. Let's see, we don't need to have him loading any OSF files yet, so I'm going to turn those off. And we're not going to create any. Here we go. Send settings. I'm going to set this to true. Since he's the only sender in the system, the default name should be fine. Now, when you send settings from one window to another, you lose the association between those settings and a particular market or interval. And we can make use of that to actually edit OSF files. So we'll come to the window on the right. We're going to make him a receiver now. So we'll go down to Edit Studies. And again, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. and work back because that's faster in this particular case. I'm going to tell him not to load OSF files. And then over here, I'm going to tell him to receive OSF files instead. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, looks the same, which it should, right? However, again, I told you that when we send settings, we lose the association between a market and an interval. And that's because when you're sending settings, the settings that are being sent could include things from an OSF file. They could include manual overrides. So they could be a composite group of settings. They're not purely from an OSF file. We don't know. So the association between the interval and the symbol is stripped away and just the settings are transferred. So given that, if we come over here in the right window, we went to SPY before, and we see that it had gone to the default settings because we didn't have an OSF file for SPY. So this time we go to SPY, and look at that. We didn't get the default settings. We actually got the same settings that were being used in the chart on the left. So what can we do at this point? Well, at this point, we can go into our chart on the right, and if we wanted to, we could create a personal OSF file. And that personal OSF file we would create a complete OSF file, and it would contain all the settings that we're currently using on this chart. And those settings came from the window on the left. So we have essentially taken the settings from that OSF file that's being used, on the left, and we could save it here and associate it with a different market and a different interval. We could even go in and make changes. So let's go in here and make some more changes. Let's increase the font size for some of the labels for things. Let's see, we got the curve there, so we can go and change that. We've also got supply and demand zones. So let's go down here, demand display settings. Here's a font size for something. I'm going to set it to 16 to make it bigger. Let's see if font size shows up somewhere else here. There's another font size. We'll change that to 16. See, this is for the distal line. Let's go to our supply band settings. There's the font size for the proximal line there. Change that to 16. for the font size for the distal. There's a font size setting. Change that to 16. Let's see, what else? Oh, we're going to change it for the curve too. All right. Here's our settings for curve. There's the font size. Set that to 16. We'll change the CIC high and low while we're here, right? Why not? Here's the font size for that. So I'll change that to 16. All right, let's save that. See what we get. Okay, so our fonts got bigger. That's a lot more readable. So now we have the settings from the left window, plus the additional changes we made here. And we can go and write that out as an OSF file. So we'll come in here. We'll scroll down. Here we go, OSF creation settings. And this time we'll make a level 1, which will be associated with the interval, in which case it would be a 5-minute interval. We could look at whatever market we want on a 5-minute interval. So set that to true. Set that to true. So what did I just do here? Hang on. Let's see. Yeah, create rules OSF file, create skins OSF file, create miscellaneous OSF file. There we go. All right. All right, let's go look at our directory. And we've got 3 more OSF files here. And you can see these OSF files have an interval in the name, but no symbol. So these can be used with any symbol on a 5-minute interval. So this particular setup we have here with the 2 windows, and the one on the left is sending his settings to the one on the right, allows us to take the window on the left, have him read in and use an OSF file, transfer those settings to the window on the right, where we can modify those settings, and then we can save those for a different market or a different interval. Now you always have to remember to come back in and turn off the writing of the OSF files, or he'll write them over and over again. So I'll just go all the way to the bottom and work backwards. There we go. So we'll turn these off. So this is one method by which you can manipulate and edit your OSF files. Now, if you want to create OSF files for layering, basically what you're going to do is you're going to start out with a clean chart and the default settings for the chart tool. And you're going to go in and make the settings you want, or make the changes you want to the settings to get the chart to look like what you want it to look like, or to make the changes that you have planned. And then when you go and you create the OSF file, you tell it to create, you tell it to create a Delta OSF file by adding that extra option. So for instance, let's go and create a Delta file here. Let's go to a different market or a different interval, perhaps. Let's try a different interval, because we shouldn't have anything for this. All right. So here we're getting the settings from the left window. We're getting our changes in the font size from manual overrides that were entered here. So if we go in and we're going to save this as an OSF file, if we create a Delta OSF file, we're only going to get the changes in the font size, because those are the manual overrides that we entered here. So this is why I'm saying, you want to start with a fresh, chart window and a fresh chart tool, so that everything is at the defaults. Because when you create a Delta file, you're just going to get, the manual overrides saved. This situation we have here is a little bit more complicated, because we're also getting the saved settings, not the saved setting, the sent settings from the left window. I mean, we could turn that off, but this will just show you that the only settings that get output into a Delta file are the manual overrides. So let's see, we're going to create another level 1. So this is going to be associated with a 10-minute chart. We'll create the rules. We'll create a Delta file. It skins. Create a Delta file. Miscellaneous. We'll create the Delta file. All right, let's see what we get. Okay. You notice we only got one file. We get a skins file on a 10-minute. Why? All the changes we made affected just the skins setting group. What were the manual overrides we put in? They were all changes to the font size. So all of those would be in the skins setting table. Since there were no changes made to the miscellaneous settings group or to the rule settings group, there was nothing to put out for a Delta. So if we go in and we look at this, come on. What do we have here? Instead of having all the settings that we had before, we have just this small number of settings here. Let's go and compare that against what we had for the 5-minute. So on the left, we have the complete OSF file. The skins file has 216 settings in it. On the right, we have the Delta, and the Delta just has 6. And these were the 6 manual overrides we entered to change the font size. So now, if we go to another market, let's go to a different market here. Let's see what's the best way to do this. He's still going to be getting his settings sent from the guy on the left. So if we go to a different interval, and we still have the manual overrides in place here, so we need to get rid of those. So we'll just go scorched earth. Well, I don't really want to do that either. So let's just, we'll just get rid of those overrides. Let's go down here to here's one. Okay. All right, here's another. Oops. Let's see, we did the curve too, didn't we? No, we'll do this one. Okay. All right. And we need to tell him to load OSF files. Okay, so if we go to a different interval now, he should be getting his settings to increase the font sizes from an OSF file, which is being layered on top of the settings that he's getting from the left window. And if I did this right, we go to another interval. We didn't get any zones to look at. Let's try. Okay. So here in this case, he's getting his settings from the left window, but he's not finding an OSF file to modify those settings. So we can see that our font sizes are back to their default values, which are really tiny. But if we go back to the 10-minute interval where we do have the OSF file, he gets the settings from the window on the left, and then he layers the Delta OSF file we created on top of those settings that he got from the window on the left. And that modifies the size of the fonts used for the supply and demand zones and the curve. So this gives you an example of how the settings can be layered. And I think you can also see how things can get confusing when you start layering and mixing OSF files in this way. So you got to be careful. You got to plan what it is you're trying to do. But the layering can be quite useful when you're doing large amounts of back testing. And so you can set up a back testing workspace where you have multiple windows. You have one window that's going to act as the master and as the trigger to start all the back tests. And that window is going to send his settings. And then each of the test windows will have its own directory with OSF files that tell it what its particular variant of the test is going to be. And since this is all done through OSF files, you can store those OSF files. You can store that directory structure in an archive and put it on the shelf. So if you want to perform that test again in the future, you can take that out, pull the directory structure with all the OSF files out of the archive, use the workspace, the generic backtest workspace you have set up, and be able to run that test again on whatever market or interval you're interested in just a few moments. It's a bit complex to go through how to set up the whole thing here, but I think you can see that that's possible. So that's one of the ways that you can potentially use the layering effect. So we've seen here the most basic way to use the OSF files to save settings or to save setups that you're using frequently. And this way, when you set up new chart windows, you can just point the chart tool to the OSF files for the settings you want to use in that window. And you don't have to manually enter all those settings. We've seen how you can edit those OSF files and change their association by using the two window setup we have here, and sending the settings from one window to another, which strips off the association. And then you can save those settings in the new window and assign a different association. You can also make changes to those settings as well. We saw that as well. We also saw a quick example of layering. And I think you can also get an idea there of how complicated that can become if you're not careful. But at the same time, you can see that you can do some very powerful and complex things there if you sit down and plan it out properly. So at this point, does anybody have any questions? Any observations or comments, or things that they would like me to go over again here?
The maximum number of settings that can go in the Delta OSF file?
No. You can put an entire table in there if you wanted to.
And that is always read.
Excuse me, that is always what?
That's always used when a chart comes up. It always picks up the Delta OSF file.
The Delta OSF file looks just like an ordinary OSF file. It just doesn't have as many settings in it typically. So you can't have a regular OSF file and a Delta OSF file in the same directory, because they both end up having the same name is what it comes down to. And you can't have files with the same name in the same directory.
But they have different, the reference is to different directories.
Now, if they are in different directories, then yes, you just point the chart tool to the directory with the one you want it to use. And again, the names are the same. They're found the same way. They would be used. The Delta file would be used just the way the regular one would.
So which means they will be combined.
What do you mean they'll be combined?
Well, if you have a Delta OSF file in the Pro OSF directory, and you have some other OSF in my OSF directory, then the two will be combined. Is that correct?
If you do have a Pro OSF file, that will be loaded first, and then the personal OSF file will be loaded on top of it. If the Pro OSF file and the personal OSF file are both Delta files, then yes, they can potentially be combined. It's also possible that the personal OSF file could overwrite something from the Pro OSF file as well, because the personal OSF file comes last and therefore has higher priority. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Any other questions? All right, then I think we can conclude this training session.